The day pride met reality. The great assembly hall of Valdorian Prime stretched across several kilometers, its crystalline walls reflecting the light of 3 suns. Representatives from 800 different species filled the tiered seating, each delegation carefully positioned according to their species rank in the galactic hierarchy. The air hummed with the gentle vibration of universal translators working to convert thousands of different languages into coherent meaning. At the center of this magnificent structure stood Supreme Chancellor Vexter, his imposing form casting long shadows across the polished floor. The Valdorian leader stood nearly 3 meters tall, his silver-scaled skin gleaming under the chamber's lights. 4 arms moved in calculated gestures as he spoke, each movement designed to display the absolute authority that had kept the galaxy in line for 3,000 years. The Valdorian Alliance had ruled through a simple principle: overwhelming superiority backed by the willingness to use it. They had ended the age of chaos, when hundreds of species fought endless wars that nearly destroyed galactic civilization. Under Valdorian rule, trade flourished, wars ceased, and billions of beings lived in relative peace. The price was simple: submission to Valdorian authority and acceptance of their place in the cosmic order. Captain Alina Rodriguez sat in the human delegation section, her dark eyes studying the alien assembly with the calm attention of a veteran strategist. She was a woman in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a simple style and wearing the plain blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. Next to her, Dr. Sarah Chen made quiet notes on a simple tablet, while Admiral Thomas Kane sat with the relaxed posture of someone completely at ease despite being surrounded by potential enemies. The human delegation looked remarkably ordinary compared to the exotic aliens filling the chamber. No advanced technology, no threatening weapons, no impressive displays of power. They appeared to be exactly what the galaxy assumed they were: a young species that had recently discovered faster-than-light travel and was now learning about the larger universe. Supreme Chancellor Vextar's voice resonated through the chamber as he began his proclamation. The Valdorian Alliance had been patient with humanity's expansion over the past 50 years. They had watched as humans established colonies without permission, formed trade agreements without paying proper tribute, and treated other species as equals rather than acknowledging Valdorian supremacy. This tolerance had been a gift, but that gift was now being withdrawn. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. Humanity would immediately cease all unauthorized expansion. They would dismantle their growing fleet and limit their population to current levels. All human colonies would pay tribute to the Valdorian Alliance, and humanity would formally acknowledge Valdorian authority over all galactic affairs. They had 72 hours to comply. The alternative was equally simple: complete annihilation. The chamber fell silent as thousands of alien eyes turned toward the small human delegation. Many species remembered their own first encounter with Valdorian ultimatums. The wise ones had submitted immediately and lived to prosper under Valdorian protection. The proud ones had resisted and been crushed so thoroughly that some species still hadn't recovered their pre-war populations centuries later. A few had been wiped out entirely as examples to others. Captain Rodriguez stood slowly, her movement unhurried and confident. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, carrying easily through the vast chamber without any hint of fear or desperation. She thanked Supreme Chancellor Vextar for his generous offer, but explained that humanity would respectfully decline. The words were delivered with the same tone one might use to politely turn down an invitation to dinner. There was no anger, No defiance, no pleading for mercy. Just a simple, calm refusal that seemed completely at odds with the magnitude of what was being rejected. The silence that followed stretched on for long moments. Alien delegates stared at the human captain in shock and disbelief. Some felt pity for a species that was about to commit suicide through pride. Others wondered what kind of beings would calmly walk toward their own destruction. A few experienced a strange admiration for courage that bordered on madness. Supreme Chancellor Vextar himself seemed stunned by the response. In 3 millennia of expansion and conquest, no species had ever simply said no to Valdorian demands with such casual confidence. His silver scales darkened with rising anger as he demanded to know if the humans understood what they were refusing. Did they comprehend the power they were challenging? Had they studied what happened to the Corinthian Empire when they defied Valdorian authority? Captain Rodriguez listened to the angry questions with the same calm expression she had maintained. Throughout the encounter, when the Chancellor finished his tirade, she did something that surprised everyone in the chamber. She smiled. Not a nervous grin or a desperate attempt at humor, but a genuine smile of someone who possessed knowledge that others lacked. Dr. Chen closed her tablet and gathered her notes with unhurried efficiency. Admiral Kane checked his communication device for messages from their ships orbiting the station. All 3 humans moved with the relaxed demeanor of people concluding a routine business meeting. They showed no signs of fear, uncertainty, or desperation about what would happen next. The human delegation began walking toward the chamber's exit, while thousands of beings watched in fascination and horror. Some species sent mental prayers to their deities, asking for mercy on the doomed humans. Others began calculating how quickly they could distance themselves from humanity before the inevitable retaliation began. A few wondered if they were witnessing incredible bravery or spectacular stupidity. Supreme Chancellor Vextar found his voice again and called after the departing humans. This was their final warning. They had 72 hours to reconsider their position. After that deadline passed, the full might of the Valdorian alliance would be brought to bear against every human world. Their species would learn the same harsh lesson that had been taught to countless others throughout galactic history. Captain Rodriguez paused at the chamber entrance and turned back toward the Valdorian leader. Her smile had not faded, and when she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the massive room. She told the Chancellor that humanity appreciated the warning and assured him that they would be ready. The 3 humans left the chamber, and the great doors sealed behind them with a sound like distant thunder. The remaining delegates sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Had they seen the last brave stand of a doomed species, or had they watched something else entirely? Supreme Chancellor Vextar stared at the empty doorway where the humans had disappeared. In 3,000 years of conquest, he had never encountered anything like this response. Every other species had eventually shown fear when faced with Valdorian power. Some had hidden it better than others, but it was always there, in their voices, their posture, their desperate attempts to negotiate. The humans had shown nothing but calm confidence, as if they knew something that the rest of the galaxy did not. Word of the failed negotiations spread through the galaxy's communication networks within hours. Intelligence services on hundreds of worlds began preparing reports for their governments. The consensus was unanimous. Humanity had perhaps 1 week before their civilization was completely erased from existence. On Earth, President Maria Santos walked through the corridors of the Global Assembly building toward the main chamber where representatives from every human world waited for her address. The weight of her species' future rested on her shoulders, but her steps were steady and confident. She had spent the last 72 hours in meetings with military leaders and scientists, reviewing plans that most humans never knew existed. The assembly hall fell silent as she took the podium. Billions of people across human space watched the broadcast, knowing that these might be among the last words their elected leader ever spoke. Children stopped playing in streets and parks. Workers paused at their stations. Soldiers checked their weapons and wondered if they would live to see another dawn. President Santos began by acknowledging the gravity of their situation. The Valdorian Alliance had given humanity an ultimatum: submit or face total annihilation. Military analysts confirmed that the alien fleets possessed overwhelming superiority in numbers, technology, and combat experience. By every logical calculation, humanity was about to be wiped from existence. She paused and looked directly into the cameras that carried her image. Across human civilization, her next words would either inspire her people to fight impossible odds, or comfort them in their final hours. When she spoke again, her voice carried a strength that seemed to come from some deep well of hidden knowledge. The president told her people that today they faced their greatest challenge as a species. An alliance that had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia had declared war on them. The aliens believed humans were primitive and defenseless, easy prey for their advanced war machine. They thought humanity would collapse at the first show of overwhelming force. Then she smiled, and that smile carried the same mysterious confidence that Captain Rodriguez had shown in the council chamber. She told the watching billions that the Valdorians were about to learn why human history was filled with stories of impossible victories against overwhelming odds. They would discover what humanity was truly capable of when pushed to the breaking point. Most importantly, they would find out why Earth's greatest strength had always been its greatest weakness turned inside out. Across human space, something began to stir. Military installations that had been quiet for decades suddenly came alive with activity. Deep underground facilities powered up systems that had been dormant for generations. On remote stations, personnel who had thought they were researchers or miners revealed their true purpose as they activated equipment that had been disguised as civilian infrastructure. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's apparent weakness had been their greatest deception. What sleeping giants do when they wake. Admiral Kethva commanded the Valdorian 7th Conquest fleet from the bridge of his flagship, the Infinite Dominion. The massive vessel stretched for 12 kilometers, its hull bristling with weapons that could reduce planets to molten slag. Around him, 300 warships of various classes moved through hyperspace in perfect formation, their combined firepower capable of sterilizing entire star systems. The Admiral studied tactical displays, showing the deployment of Valdorian forces across human space. 15 separate fleets were converging on every major human colony simultaneously. Intelligence reports indicated that humanity possessed perhaps 200 combat vessels, most of them converted merchant ships with improvised weapons. The coming battle would be less a war than an extermination. Kethva had participated in 47 conquest campaigns during his long career. He had seen species fight with desperate courage, others attempt to negotiate even as their worlds burned, and a few simply surrender without resistance. What he had never encountered was the strange confidence that humans had displayed during the negotiations. It puzzled him, but he attributed it to ignorance of what they were truly facing. The hyperspace jump concluded, and the Valdorian fleet emerged into normal space at the edge of the Sol system. Immediately, sensors began cataloging human defensive positions throughout the system. What they found was exactly what intelligence had predicted: a few dozen warships of questionable capabilities scattered among the planets, along with various space stations and orbital platforms that appeared to be civilian infrastructure. Admiral Kethfer opened communication channels to address the human defenders. He followed standard Valdorian protocol by offering one final chance for surrender. Any human vessels that powered down their weapons and submitted to boarding would be spared. Those who chose to fight would be destroyed without mercy. The response came from a human admiral named Thomas Kane, broadcasting from a ship called the Defiant. His image appeared on the main screen, showing a man in his 60s with grey hair and calm eyes that seemed strangely familiar. Kane thanked the Valdorian admiral for his generous offer, but explained that humanity would have to decline. Again, that same inexplicable confidence. Admiral Kethfer ended the communication and gave orders to begin the attack. His fleet advanced toward the inner system in battle formation, weapons charging and shields at maximum power. The human ships began moving to intercept their formation, loose and seemingly unprofessional compared to Valdorian precision. The first exchange of fire came as the fleets closed to optimal weapons range. Valdorian energy beams lanced out toward human vessels with surgical precision, each shot calculated to disable rather than destroy. The admiral preferred to capture enemy ships when possible for intelligence gathering and psychological impact. But something was wrong. The human ships were moving in ways that defied their apparent technological limitations. They shifted course with impossible speed and precision, avoiding shots that should have been unavoidable. Their return fire was equally puzzling, targeting Valdorian systems with accuracy that suggested detailed knowledge of alien ship designs. More disturbing were the weapons themselves. Instead of the primitive energy guns that intelligence had predicted, human ships fired projectiles that seemed to phase in and out of normal space, bypassing shields and striking hull plating directly. Several Valdorian vessels reported critical damage from weapons that shouldn't have been able to penetrate their defenses. Admiral Kethfer demanded updated intelligence reports as his fleet engaged the surprisingly effective human defenders. What he received made no sense. Sensor readings indicated that human ships were somehow generating energy, signatures far beyond what their visible technology should allow. Some vessels appeared to be drawing power from sources that weren't there. The battle continued for 2 hours, before Admiral Kethfer realized he was losing. Not just failing to win quickly, but actually losing ships to an enemy that should have been obliterated in the first few minutes of combat. Human vessels were using tactics he had never encountered, weapons that violated known physics, and displaying coordination that suggested a level of strategic thinking the Valdorians had never faced. Then the real surprise began. What the Valdorians had assumed were civilian space stations suddenly revealed themselves as heavily armed fortresses, mining platforms transformed into artillery batteries. Research stations became command centers, coordinating system-wide defense networks. The entire Sol system had been turned into a fortress without anyone noticing. But the greatest shock came when Admiral Kane contacted the Valdorian fleet again. This time, his transmission was broadcast on all frequencies so that every ship in both fleets could hear his words. He explained that the Valdorians had made a fundamental error in their assessment of humanity. The admiral described how human civilization had never known true peace, For thousands of years, humans had fought wars that would have destroyed less resilient species. They had survived ice ages, plagues, natural disasters, and countless conflicts that had forged them into something unique in the galaxy. What the Valdorians saw as primitive chaos was actually an endless training ground that had produced the most dangerous predators in known space. Humanity had spent centuries perfecting the art of war, not because they loved violence, but because they refused to become extinct. Every human who lived carried the genetic legacy of survivors who had endured impossible odds. Their technology might look primitive, but it was designed by beings who understood that pretty weapons meant nothing if they couldn't win battles. More importantly, humans had learned something that the Valdorians' 3 millennia of easy conquest had never taught them: how to fight when victory seemed impossible. Every human military doctrine was based on the assumption that they would face superior enemies with better technology and greater numbers. They had prepared for exactly this scenario. As Admiral Kane spoke, similar scenes were playing out across human space. Valdorian fleets that had expected easy victories found themselves facing enemies who fought with a combination of tactical brilliance, technological deception, and sheer bloody-minded determination that they had never encountered. Human commanders were using strategies pulled from thousands of years of warfare against seemingly impossible odds. The psychological impact on Valdorian forces was devastating. For 3,000 years, they had fought species that feared them. Humans showed no fear, only a grim satisfaction at finally facing enemies worthy of their full attention. They fought like beings who had been waiting their entire lives for a war this challenging. Admiral Kethfer found himself in full retreat within 6 hours of entering the Sol system. His once mighty fleet had been reduced to half strength by an enemy that should have been swept aside like space debris. Similar reports were arriving from other Valdorian commanders throughout human space. The conquest fleets were not just failing to achieve victory. They were being systematically destroyed by opponents who seemed to anticipate their every move. The turning point came when human reinforcements arrived. Ships that had been hidden throughout their space for decades suddenly appeared, revealing that humanity's true fleet was 10 times larger than intelligence had estimated. These vessels bore no resemblance to the converted merchant ships the Valdorians had expected. They were warships built from the ground up by a species that had never forgotten how to fight for survival. Supreme Chancellor Vegstar received the reports from his conquest fleets with growing disbelief and rage. In less than 24 hours, the greatest military force in galactic history had been routed by a species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers. The implications were staggering, not just for the Valdorian alliance, but for the entire galactic order they had maintained for 3 millennia. The galaxy watched in shock as news of the human victory spread through communication networks. Species that had submitted to Valdorian rule centuries ago began to wonder what might have been possible if they had fought back. Others started to question whether the Valdorian alliance was truly invincible, or if they had simply never faced an opponent that refused to be intimidated. President Santos addressed the galaxy from Earth. Her message broadcast to every inhabited world. She explained that humanity had no desire to conquer or rule over other species. They wanted only to be left alone to pursue their own destiny among the stars. However, they would defend themselves with absolute determination against any who threatened their freedom. The president made it clear that humans understood the value of peace, but they also understood that peace could only exist when backed by the strength to enforce it. They had learned from their own violent history that predators only respected superior predators. The Valdorian Alliance could choose to coexist with humanity as equals, or they could continue to face the consequences of their miscalculation. The galaxy would never be the same. The species that had maintained order through fear and intimidation had met their match in beings who had been forged by conflict and refined by adversity. Humanity had not just won a war, they had shattered the foundation of an empire built on the assumption that peace came through submission. In the months that followed, other species began to assert their independence from Valdorian rule. The galaxy entered a new age where power was no longer concentrated in the hands of a single alliance, but distributed among many species who had learned from humanity's example that strength came not from domination, but from the willingness to fight for freedom. The Valdorian Alliance still existed, but they now shared the galaxy with equals rather than subjects. And at the center of this new order stood humanity, the species that had proven that sometimes the best way to achieve peace was to be too dangerous for anyone to attack. The Titans had awakened, and the galaxy would never sleep easily again. Asterisk.